Hi, everybody, and welcome. I am Judith Silverman Hodara. I'm a founder and principal at Fortuna Admissions. I am so excited to be joined here today by three of my amazing colleagues who have come together across time zones to talk with you a little bit about Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, and the top MBA program essays. So delighted to have my colleagues Tatiana Nemo, Curtis Johnson, and Malvina Complainville with us. They're going to all introduce themselves, but in a moment, just wanted to tell you a little bit about Fortuna, where we come from, and what we do. So Fortuna was started a number of years ago by former admissions directors who felt that given our backgrounds as gatekeepers to some of the world's top business schools, we really wanted to share what it was that we knew about getting admitted to business school and how the process could really be helped by the kind of experiences that we have had. So you can see there on your screen a lot of the schools that we have representation from, and it seems like that list keeps growing on an almost monthly basis. What we pride ourselves on is really thoughtful strategic guidance. And I think that that's something to consider, that you want individuals that are going to be thought partners with you in the process, that are not just going to pat you on the head and say, oh, it's all going to be okay. There are people that are going to give you unbiased feedback and incredibly actionable advice and tangible items to really react to throughout the application process. So I am so happy that Fortuna was started, and here we are. A little bit about me. As I mentioned, I was a Fortuna co-founder with my colleagues Matt Simmons and Caroline DeArte Edwards. I was the former acting head of Wharton Admissions, and I am a Penn University Wharton person all the way through with a couple of graduate degrees from their School of Education. Next up, we have Tatiana, who's going to introduce herself, and then we'll just go through Curtis and Malvina right after that.
Thank you, Judith, and thank you everybody for being here. It's a pleasure to talk to you all. So I graduated from Stanford and have remained as close as I possibly can to the school. I love it. I volunteered as an interviewer for many years. And then when I started working with Fortuna, which has been phenomenal, I have remained as an interviewer for undergrad programs, but then very close to many of the other alumni chapter and any other activities that I have been able to plug into the school. My career has mostly been in corporate strategy with different companies, and I definitely love to do these coaching as a part of my overall professional activity.
Great. Hello, everybody. My name is Curtis Johnson. I am a graduate of the Wharton School of Business. While I was there, I was in the Leadership Fellow program, among other things, but really had a full experience while there. Professionally, I've been working in a corporate brand strategy function for the last 5 years. I worked at the Walt Disney Company. So we pride ourselves on great storytelling, and it's something that, frankly, I have a passion for. I was a journalism undergrad and worked in journalism and communications for a good deal of my career prior to Wharton, and enjoy just working on building brands and telling stories. It's so critical to this process. And so I'm happy to be here as a part of the Fortuna family, and eager to address some of the tips later on in this webinar. Thank you.
And hi, everyone. I'm Malvina Miller-Complainville. I'm a former assistant director of career services at HBS, and as the head of the HBS programs and communications team, I was responsible for providing career training and guidance to HBS students. And as a member of the career coaching team, I spent literally hundreds of hours coaching students on how to achieve their post-MBA goals. My professional background is in career development, including running talent management and campus recruitment at L'Oréal USA for a number of years. I've worked in France, I've worked in the US, and I'm now currently based in the UK. And I've been with Fortuna since the very beginning.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody. And just wanted to run through a little bit about what we're going to do on today's call. And then I think probably the best thing to do for our coaches is that maybe if you're not talking about your school, you'll take off your video. And then when you are talking about your school, you'll come back. So if everybody's comfortable with that, maybe just to make it a little bit easier for our viewers. So we're going to start out talking about the Stanford School of Business. And as you can see, we're then going to move through the Wharton program and HBS, giving you a sense of key points, how to stand out, and then things that you probably want to avoid within the context of your application. And I can tell you, I was reviewing someone's essay this morning, actually with Tatiana, and I said, this essay sounds like he could apply to 5 schools with the same essay. So clearly a pitfall there. You want to make sure that you're really specific about the school that you're talking about. And no, I did not make that up. That really happened about an hour ago. Great. So thank you again, Tatiana, for being with us. And we're going to dive into Stanford, talking a little bit about the tips and why it is so important to show that you are an agent of change for the Stanford School of Business.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you, Judith. So basically, as we know, the Stanford motto or the Stanford message is basically change lives, change organizations, change the world. And in that regard is that they do want to find individuals with the strength, the push, the initiative, the stamina to have real impact, to have an appetite to pursue that real impact. So it's important that you show that side of yourself. Has to be something absolutely credible and something that resonates genuinely with your heart, but it's important to have that that strong presence and that vision that you bring in your essays. Secondly, these fit. It's important to fit into this class. It's not a big class and it's incredible, but in those 2 years, you get to know all of your classmates pretty well. And you build these really, really strong ties and strong relationships that endure through many, many years. And so in that fit, it's important to have elements such as integrity. And that integrity is going to manifest in different ways, but it's important for the admissions office to have a good feel of how that integrity manifests in your particular case. That ability to open up, to be vulnerable, not to be guarded, that's also important because that demonstrates a certain strength rather than having to project an unbreakable image. It's in that vulnerability, that accessibility, that capacity to open up that it makes you accessible. And then definitely to have the good material to be able and have the capacity to grow in supportive yet challenging environments. That's also important because the whole idea is not to have an end product be part of the class, but to have someone in the makings, someone that has the elements and all the pieces to be able to grow further and grow in an accelerated manner in those 2 years and to have the capacity to keep growing past graduation. Third is it's very important to be able to articulate your career goals. Doesn't mean that you have absolute certainty that you're going to be able to carve that in stone and say, yes, this is exactly how life is going to evolve and unravel in the next 10 years. But you need to have an appetite and a career vision, a sense of where you're heading, and then be able to articulate in a very convincing way why then do you need to bring into that vision and that appetite for your career goal? Where does Stanford fit in? How is that going to become a platform into taking you where you want to go? It cannot just be it's a good thing to have, or there has to be, deliberate steps and deliberate knowledge, in terms of how are you seeing where you're heading and how Stanford fits into that. Number 4, these, contribution to community, contribute to life on the farm. It's important that and this is, like, I think it's important to Stanford, it's important to other schools, but it's very important to bring that energy and engagement where you're, like, in terms of what are you planning to benefit from and what are you going to bring to that community? And it has to be clearly articulated as well. It cannot just be a second thought. It cannot just be something that can be done in passing. There has to be intention into how are you going to be contributing and having an impact into that community. And of course, the admissions office very much finds that the best way to predict what's going to happen in the future is by finding evidence of what has been done in the past. So, any extracurricular engagement, any engagement with community in the past, it's always going to be well regarded and should be part of your application. And then finally, these authentic and humble component, it's very key, and it goes back to that fit in terms of being able to open up and to be vulnerable. Some individuals might think that vulnerability is a sign of weakness, when in reality, vulnerability is a sign of strength. It means that you are confident in your own skin, and that's the kind of attitude, that's a kind of interaction that's well regarded and it's expected. So it's having this humble tone in how you talk about what you have achieved, but you a very thoughtful illustration of how you're doing that. And so basically, those would be my thoughts, Judith, in terms of these 5 tips.
Great, thank you so much. And these, of course, are tips that are going to be relevant to many of the schools that you're thinking about. But what we tried to do within the context of this webinar was to really break out the things in particular that we know are important to each of the schools. I'd like to move on now to the essay questions, which some people consider are some of the toughest ones out there. It's usually this and HBS are the ones I usually tell people to start with, because they are the ones that really get to the heart of the matter. So again, what really matters to you? What gets you out of bed in the morning? Why is this important to you? How have you been shaped by things to have led you to these perspectives? And then secondly, why is it that this school is a great fit for you, which is something that Tatiana really discussed. Again, the fit, how understanding the culture, and this in particular is a question that does require a pretty deep dive into understanding the campus and its community. Now, interestingly, both essays combined may not exceed a little bit over 1,100 words, and you can pretty much decide how you want to break it down, but essentially 1,000 words is about 2 pages, just to give you a sense of what you're going to be accomplishing throughout the course of these essays. And Tatiana, I'm going to kind of throw it back to you to go through each of these essays, if you can, and talk about how it is that you would address these questions. What key points must I include in these essays?
Mm-hmm. And so the way that I see the first essay is that there is the opportunity to talk about things that are personal to you. It's very important, I think, that to focus on what the igniters, the shapers, the motivators, all the elements that have influenced you and that have made you who you are. And it's more about talking about who you are rather than what you've done. So when you truly touch upon the genuine journey of what has made you, that it's very difficult when it's done in a genuine, deep, introspective manner. It's very difficult for that not to feel true and honest and straight from the heart. So it's very important that that first essay, it's a reflection of, like that depth in the introspection, that really knowing what has influenced me, what has shaped me, what motivates me, what makes me who I am. And that is, I think, those are very, very key components. On the second essay, it's very important, just as I mentioned before, that it's important to have clarity in terms of your professional appetite? Where are your career goals heading? How do you see yourself in the next few years? What are your aspirations? What is your picture of success? All of that needs to be shown on that second essay. And very importantly, emphasizing how is the Stanford community and what are Stanford academics and faculty, and what is the overall network and the energy from the school. How is that going to add to your own story? Because this is not only a matter of adding, like a strong name to your resume. There has to be a lot of deliberation and a lot of intentionality as to why do you want to pursue that school in particular. I think you're on mute.
I muted myself. There's someone's doing yard work nearby. How can I stand out from the other applicants, Tatiana? What are, I know this is such a big question, but a couple of things that you might say is really important. I know that being genuine is probably top of the list.
Absolutely. And again, because every time I think I have my first conversations with candidates, they all have these expectations that have been planted from one conversation or another, thinking that there is a specific profile of a Stanford candidate, or that there's a most preferred profile of individuals that are applying to the school. And in reality, my take, and like the way that I experienced it myself, is the more that you can, the more honest and the more courageous that you can be in owning exactly what has made you, who are you, what are your dreams and your aspirations. That's the best way to present yourself. And that's what's going to make you unique in that sense. So it's avoiding to fall into these pitfalls of thinking, oh, what they want is X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to fit myself into that pattern, or I'm going to try to portray myself under that light. In reality, it's losing any and every expectation that you may have formed from, side conversations or even individuals that you have interacted with that went to the school. This is seriously all about showing the person that you are and that you are going to be bringing to the table, to that community, and the person that is going to keep progressing and evolving once you graduate. So they want to truly have a sense of what your personal character is. And so I know, it sounds just a bit mysterious in terms of, okay, so what you stand out, but it's just as simple as making sure that you're presenting yourself in the most honest and courageous light. That's what's going to make you stand out.
And what are some of the things, I'm going to ask maybe just for one major pitfall, specifically within the essay, within the context of the essays that you could mention?
Yeah, I think, like getting too carried away about talking about what you've done rather than who you are. I think that because then it's very difficult for individuals at the admissions office to have a full grasp of like who you are, what triggers you, what motivates you, what are you afraid of, all these things that might make you feel uncomfortable because you want to present yourself into these almost armored, perfect portrayal of yourself, when in reality what they want to see is like where's your potential for developing further self-awareness, because there's no stronger leadership but a leader that is aware of their own strengths and their own weaknesses and very aware of what impact they have on others. And so if you're too self-absorbed, if you're too consumed by the things that you have achieved and just presenting yourself in that constrained type manner, it's not giving enough of that fertile ground in terms of being aware of your surroundings, being aware of how you can impact other lives, how you can change these lives, these organizations, and ultimately change the world. Mute.
I have to stop doing that. If you'll excuse me, I'm going to shut the door. That may help. Okay. So I really feel like we could do a session with each of these schools in particular. We might come back and do that at another time, but we're going to move on to West Philadelphia and a building affectionately known as the Death Star, Huntsman Hall. Curtis, I am so happy to have you with us all the way from the West Coast, and hope you had a good, strong cup of coffee this morning. So Curtis is our storyteller, and he's joined our team just with an amazing sense of how to help students put together a really, really compelling presentation. We're really delighted to have him here with us this morning. So Curtis, can you talk about some insider tips for the Wharton School? I can already see tip number 1, team orientation, as indicated by our famous team-based interview session, which strikes fear in the heart of both administrators and students, I should mention. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and why don't you walk us through the top 5 tips for the Wharton applicant?
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the team-based interview. I got there just before we switched over to that. So, nice. Yeah, I managed to make it before that. But, you know, you're right. That is, I think, the number one thing that I would say is to be able to demonstrate your team orientation. You know, Wharton is looking for people who are going to be leaders of people. And so, you know, whether it's collaboration, whether it's influencing without authority, whether it's building trust with folks, you know, this is a key tenet that admissions officers are looking for throughout the process. And it's evidenced by the group interview, as you mentioned. It's evidenced by the first class that you take at Wharton, which essentially is a mix, a hybrid of both a analytical but also an experiential class that is all about dynamics of team and dynamics of team leadership. And so that is something that you want to keep first and foremost in your mind as you move forward through the applicant process. Excuse me. I'd say number 2 would be balance your professional and personal profile. And I think some of that might go without saying, but as you're looking at Wharton and frankly, a lot of these high performing, these top schools, you have high performing people who excel in the academic world, they excel in the professional world, and really what you want that, you're going to get that. But what you also want is people who are going to balance that with, you know, with an interest in things outside of the academic realm, that demonstrate a certain intellectual curiosity about the world around them. I think that lends itself very well to Wharton's global emphasis, and it lends itself very well to people who want to lead and work with other people of all different backgrounds. Thirdly, I say you need to convey your interest in Wharton, and here I would almost use a dating example where, you know, it doesn't matter how beautiful you are. It doesn't matter how many times you get put on.
I always use the dating example.
Is that right?
It is very apt.
I've never heard you. Okay, well, I thought it was original, but
all right, I'm going to give you credit. I'm going to give you credit.
I mean, I can't say it enough, though. I mean, no matter how many times you get hit on, you still want to feel like the person that's on the other end of that is being sincere, is being authentic, and is looking for you and not what your reputation is or how it might make them look. And so if you think about this process very similarly, you know, you want to look at Wharton and its world-class resources and say, you know, these are the different ways that the things that I value about the Wharton community. I've done the research, and I can speak to you intelligently about how I will fit in on campus, whether it be through, as I mentioned, the Wharton Leadership Fellow Program, whether it be through a semester in SF, whether it be through some of the many extracurriculars. You need to really paint the picture of how you're going to fit in on the campus. And I think that ties well into number 4, which is highlight your extracurriculars. So, you know, like you want people who are going to be involved and actively contribute to the campus. One of the things that the admission officers recognize and that people who are part of the community recognize is that some of the deepest, some of the most impactful learning that you have is going to actually happen it's not going to happen in the classroom. It's going to happen through some of these extracurricular touch points that you may be involved in at Wharton. And so what better way to demonstrate that you can contribute to that than to show that you have an interest in things outside of your specific lane in your career. And so I think that that's just another thing to highlight as you're going through the process. And then lastly, you want to present your career plans, and no one is going to come for you in the fall or during the summer and say, you wrote an essay on being a marketer, but you're recruiting for consulting. I mean, that's not going to happen. But, at the same time, what you want to do is you really do need to demonstrate that you have some sort of focus or vision for how you want your career to go. As I mentioned, there is a value in intellectual curiosity and being able to see and absorb all the different things that are at your fingertips when you're at Wharton. But you do need to have some level of focus and discipline about what you're doing. And so if your goal is to get a stamp on the resume, if your goal is to, look at this as a pit stop between, this gig and that gig, or an accelerator to the C-suite, and that's the only thing that you want from this process, then that's exactly what the admissions officers are looking to weed out. And so I think these would be the tips that I'd give you as a top 5, and certainly have served me well in both the coaching arena and coaching journey with others, as well as just my own personal journey.
And one more thing on the career plans piece, I can attest to the fact that I used to sit next to the director of career services on the admissions committee. So they're there, and they want to see if what you want to do is viable. Does it make sense? Do you have a plan? So just to sort of highlight the fact that although we work in very different capacities, this is very much central to what Wharton is keeping in mind. Are you going to be able to accomplish what you've sort of presented as your next steps? So Curtis, bringing your marketing and storytelling hat to the table, can you tell us about how you would manage these essays? These 2 essays, they're not the most exciting ones on the block, I gotta tell you. Every so often we would get together as a team and try and rewrite the essays, and they've had their ups and downs. This has been the essay for a couple of years now. It's pretty straightforward. I sort of tell people that this is like the 3rd essay group that I would do. I tend to say do Harvard and Stanford first, but what you work on kind of helps to distill what you really want to do professionally and personally. I also call essay number 1 the grandmother question, because someone is going to sit you down like your grandmother and say, why are you going to spend all this money and take 2 years out of your life to get a degree? What good is going to come of it? So Curtis, can you walk us through some of the ways that Wharton is looking for some answers? What must you include on these 2 essays? Yeah.
You mentioned the first one being a grandmother question. It's pretty straightforward, and it really is designed to get at that last point that I mentioned, is really articulating your vision for your career. Who are you, and what have you done? Where are you going? And then how specifically, and I want to underscore the importance of the specificity, but how specifically will the Wharton community help you get there? At the end of this essay, you want that admissions officer to be able to read that essay and say, yep, I see exactly how Judith is going to fit into the Wharton community. And I see how the Wharton community is going to help elevate her goals very specifically, because we offer these unique programs or this unique experience to be able to accentuate what she's already bringing to the table. And so it's a very, there's the give and take. You need to be able to articulate how you're going to contribute to the Wharton community and how your uniqueness, because we all have a unique story, but how that uniqueness fits into this community. And then you also need to be able to really demonstrate your understanding of how Wharton will take you to that next level. And so, that I think essay number 1 is very much designed to get at that grandmother question. I think that generally, and I don't know if we want to talk a little bit about essay number 2.
That would be great, actually. I'm sorry, I just focused on 1, but would love to hear 2. I actually like 2 a little bit more. It kind of, has you think about the past, think about the future. And I think it gets a little bit more like what makes you tick.
Yeah, 100%. I think so as well. And I think for this one, you really want to focus on, what's important to you, and think about that I think, you can get caught up in trying to find the best accomplishment here, but I think, really delving into those leadership qualities that you bring to the table and demonstrate an interest in developing those is really going to be how you can really nail this essay number 2. And, as a leader, you're looking for people who, or as a school rather, you're looking for people who can be leaders and who can impact the world around them, whatever small corner you may have or whatever piece that might be. Doesn't have to be broad. I think what it has to be is intentional and focused.
And how do you feel like that's how you would stand out from an applicant? As an applicant, is that intentionality something that you would cite as like how you're going to kind of come forward in the crowd?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the intentionality is right. And a part of it is being able to be well versed on what Wharton has to offer. You need to interact with folks within the community. If you can go to campus, all the better. But if you can't, let's be thoughtful about ways that you can get touch points. Maybe there are MBA fairs near you. Maybe there are other students and people within your network that you may be able to reach out to. But your ability to communicate with that specificity is going to be directly tied to how much and how much you know about the school and how authentic your search/discovery process has been in getting to know and understand that school. So I think absolutely that's one way to stand out. I think one other way that I would add that folks can stand out is really being able to articulate Wharton's value in terms of both the tangible and the intangible. A lot of times we're thinking about, when we think of, oh, this school has X thing to offer and this is going to get me to the next step. Sometimes we're thinking about, I need to go through this program, or I need to have this professor or take this interdisciplinary program. And those are all fine and great. But as I mentioned before, I think a lot of the learning kind of happens in these gray areas, right? It happens in these within your learning team and interacting with people from all different cultures and backgrounds and interests. That is where the learning kind of really can take shape. And if you're able to think about how you can articulate that value in intangibles, how it might bolster your ability to communicate. So Wharton is one school where there is a emphasis in you need to take communications courses as a part of the core curriculum. I mean, maybe that's a big part of what you really want to focus on. For me, when I was coming in, I knew that I had an interest in people and leading people. And so I targeted
communications also. So.
I did have a background in communications, right? And so I was able, and that was one thing I was able to contribute. I was a TA of the communications courses while I was there and sort of leaned into that background, but then also being able to be a part of the leadership program where we're going through the same trainings on leadership that executives at places like Citi are going through, and have the chance to work with first years and mentor them, coach them at a very intimate level, manage learning team processes. So very much, the extent that you're able to understand how these things are impacting the intangible and building your profile. I think if you can articulate that, that's definitely a way to stand out as well.
And give me one major pitfall. I know I mentioned one this morning when I was reviewing the Wharton essay, not being specific enough. But what would you say is like the major thing in your time in reviewing applications, working with students? What's a big pitfall to be avoided?
Yeah, I think probably in essay 2, when you talk about this impactful experience or accomplishment, I think there's a natural desire to want to go big. You're in this mode where you want to people to understand just how much of a force you are, just how much of a powerhouse you are. And I think that instead of focusing on that impact of what that experience had on you, sometimes people are focused on what that impact had on maybe other people or the other situations around them. I would definitely encourage you to focus on, what is that impact on you? what situation took you from here and had the greatest delta from taking you from here to there? And how will that impact your ability to lead while at the Wharton School? I think that's the way that you should be interpreting this question. You don't need to solve world hunger by the end of this essay. And in fact, some of the best lessons come from situations that maybe didn't turn out as good as you might have liked.
I was just about to say, sometimes a failure is a really good way to talk about what you learned and what you're going to bring.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Curtis, thank you so much. And I wish we had more time, but we're going to move on now to Harvard. And Malvina Miller-Complanville, who is joining us from London. So can we talk a little bit about the Harvard tips? There are so many things, Malvina, that we would like to share. And I know that you maintain incredibly close ties to the institution, and also because you've worked at a number of different schools in the US and abroad, you really have a sense of what it is that makes HBS a little bit different from the schools that we've heard from earlier. So can you walk us through some of these main tips?
Sure. So I think HBS has a little bit of a different approach in their essay, for one, compared to Stanford and Wharton, which we just covered. And I think, Judith, you're going to read the essay prompt.
Yes.
But I will say that, one of the things that HBS reminds the applicants is that they're going to be looking at the essay, but not just the essay. They're going to be looking at all aspects of the application, the recommendation letter, the online form that you have to fill out, your school records, and the essay is just an additional element. And they really are looking for new material. They don't want to be looking at a rehash of a resume, just factual information. They're really looking for introspective insight. And I would say that, one way, so we have here tip number 1, stand out from your peer group. And one way to stand out from your peer group in your HBS application is to really give some deep thought to what is unique in your background. Really think about, how you differ from your peer group, and maybe you fast-tracked in your consulting career. Maybe you've done something really unusual, or you have done something unusual in your personal life, or in your extracurriculars, or in your professional life. But think about those stories and think about how you can pull these stories to start building a profile that will help you differentiate yourself. You really need to think about how you can describe your unique value proposition and provide specific examples to illustrate that. Having those specific examples is key to make you credible. And you also want to think about the type of contribution that you can provide to the program. So it's not just, you want me for this reason, for these particular reasons, but it's also, how can I contribute to the classroom, the community, as an alum, and to think about how you're going to give back. So standing out from your peer group, and both in terms of what you can provide, what you can give, and what you offer, and how clear your message is. Tip number 2, showcasing your leadership. So HBS is known for developing leaders who will, quote unquote, contribute to the well-being of society. And I think it's important to know that admissions will give greater weight to leadership experience and less weight to actually intellectual ability, intellectual horsepower. So they're less interested in your grades and more interested in the kind of impact you've had and the kind of impact that you have a potential to have in the future. And that's very important to address in your essays. And I'm actually going to paraphrase Dean Noria, and he talks about what distinguishes Harvard Business School, and that is that HBS graduates provide leadership across industries, embodying competence, but also character. And he says that a true leader is one who has earned the trust of others in organizations and in communities. And I actually, this notion of leadership is something that comes up again and again when I work with clients. what is a leader and how can I define myself as a leader? And I don't have good leadership examples. And, you know, a good exercise is to really think about leadership in a way that it's not just in terms of hierarchy, but to think about ways that you've made an impact, you know, in your personal life, at work, and also in any extracurriculars that you're involved in. So tip number 3 is to articulate a clear, ambitious, and realistic career vision. And I think that Tatiana and Curtis and Judith, you've all talked about this and how important it is. And so what I'll say here is that, you know, your goals don't need to be carved in stone. You know, your short-term goals, your long-term goals, when admissions reads your goals, they understand that they may change once you arrive at school. But what you want to be really clear about is the kind of impact that you want to have, and to have a good idea of how you can make that happen so that you have an understanding of how you can build a career that will make an impact. Yeah. So even if that will change over time, just the fact that you are clear-minded about how to grow a career to have this kind of impact is going to be very reassuring for admissions. Let's see, and then tip number 4, we have demonstrate strong communication skills. So this is very important to HBS. And actually, when you write your HBS essay, even though there's no word limit, it's really in your interest to be very concise and very clear and to the point, and almost think about, you know, doing less of a narrative and more of a, you know, every word counts in the essay, more businessy in a way. So strong communication skills is essential for HBS. And part of the reason is that you're going to be using the case method as a student. And when you do the case method, a lot of the content of the classroom discussion actually originates from the students in the classroom. And half of your grade, or about half of your grade, is going to be based on the quality of your verbal contribution to the classroom. So admissions is already looking in your application to see whether you are a strong communicator, whether you're to the point, you're concise, and if you have good examples of that you can interweave in your essay, it's really helpful. Times when you've persuaded a team to move in a certain direction, times when you've done big presentations, things of that nature. Tip number 5, take advantage of the open essay. Mm-hmm. I actually love the open essay. I think it's an amazing opportunity to think about, you know, what doesn't come across in your resume, in your recommendation letters, in your school records that you really want to put to highlight for admissions. And it's an opportunity for you to tell your narrative the way you want to tell your narrative. You're not restricted by, you know, particular, limiting question. And it really forces you to also reflect on, you know, what have I done so far? Why have I made the decisions I've made? How have those decisions impacted me? Why am I deciding to go in this particular direction? What kind of impact do I want to have? How does HBS fit in? And to bring all of this into a strong narrative.
So talking about the essays and taking advantage of them, Malvina, and I know that you are so thorough and patient and really, you know, it doesn't come overnight, right? There's a lot of come on, and really like sometimes it's hard. You got to bring people through it. So again, as we've talked about Wharton and Stanford, it sounds like a crazy question, but what are they looking for? What should I say? Is there anything that I should be, you know, and then I have a question. I know we got a question from one of our candidates, and we're going to try to get to it later on. So we're not ignoring you, but we want to make sure that we talk on some of these key points for what HBS is looking for.
So yes, Judith, I think most importantly, there is a self-reflection or a deep reflection that needs to take place before you tackle the writing of the essay, to really understand the narrative that you're going to be putting forward, and to think about those examples that showcase the elements of the story that you want to bring forward. I actually think that HBS shares the keys to the puzzle on their, in the information that they share with candidates. They talk about, admissions talks about 3 metrics that they use to evaluate candidates. They talk about a habit of leadership, analytical aptitude, and engaged community citizenship. And I'm going to break these down for you. So how are we doing okay with time today? Good. Yeah? Okay. So firstly, you want to think about how, these 3 elements, leadership, analytical aptitude, and community citizenship, are represented in all aspects of your application, not just your essay. And think about, what you want to really pull and develop in your essay. Habit of leadership. So HBS's mission is to educate leaders who make a difference in the world. And Dean Noria talks about looking for leaders who will create value. So it's important to think about, the type of leader that you are or that you want to become. And when you're thinking about, expressing those thoughts, really carefully selecting examples that will illustrate, maybe times when you change something or you coach someone or represented an organization or turned around a situation. This habit of leadership is, times when you stepped up. And it's, again, not necessarily the traditional understanding of leadership, but it can be, showing leadership in different ways. Analytical aptitude and curiosity. Now, this has to do with, your intellectual ability, but it also has to do with your desire to learn and to be curious. And that's where the word curiosity comes in. So some of this is going to be shown through your school records, your GMAT score. But, for example, if you're not quite happy with your GMAT score, if there's some issues with your GPA, this may be an opportunity for you to address this in your essay and to talk about, times when you successfully managed a difficult analytical problem or something like that. And I think if you are also someone who's only worked in one particular industry, it can also be a time where you could talk about how curious you are to learn from different industries and to interact with your fellow classmates and to learn from them. Engage community citizenship. So HBS is looking for students who will make positive contributions to their environment. And there's many ways that, that you should think about how you can illustrate this. And, there's obviously examples of things you've done in your organization that were above and beyond, or times when you volunteered, or, during your undergraduates, things that you did with sports organizations or musical events, or, really think about how you interacted in your community, both work community, personal, school, and think about taking it that step further and think about how you will be contributing to the HBS community once you're on campus. Let's see.
And I'm so sorry. Yeah. What about standing out from the other applicants? I know that's a question you get asked all the time. That's what people come to us, they're worried. Like, oh, I know that I am one of X, or there's a ton of people applying for my background. How do I make myself stand out? I think that's probably that in the GMAT or like the number 1 questions that we get asked in that first phone call. So what would you say, Malvina?
I would say, I think there's a lot of pressure to try to look perfect or be perfect. And I would say that, don't try to answer what you think admissions is looking for, basically, is really be genuine, make sure that your voice is coming across, go through that self-reflection time, which it does take time. So, before you put pen to paper, really reflect on some of these things that we discussed, and develop a genuine and, unique voice in your essay that is really going to help you stand out in your application. I would also say show real self-awareness, which comes together with that reflection that you would be going through. show self-awareness, think about, the decisions that you've made in your life and why you made those decisions and how they impacted you. Think about connecting some of the dots between, going from here to there, and the lessons you learned along the way, how you grew. Connect those dots for admissions. Don't assume that they will do it for you. Doing some of these things will help really make you stand out from the rest of the applicant pool.
And what's a major pitfall? I know that this is a loaded question, but can you give us a big one that you see frequently about students and their application process?
So I think that, one, I think is not doing proper research on the school. And I think Tatiana and Curtis have talked a little bit about that, but you can't pitch yourself to a school if you don't really understand what the school is about, what their values are, and how they differ from other schools. And, just saying, I want to go to HBS, or I want to go to Stanford, or I want to go to Wharton because it's the best school is just not good enough. You really need to do research on the school and think about, what are the school's offerings that will help you fill in some of those gaps that you have, and be able to talk about that. And that will make you sound so much more credible. So I think that would be one of probably the biggest pitfall I tend to see is just assuming that everyone will know why they're applying to HBS.
And which is kind of funny now that you mention it, but a very big lesson for our listeners and our viewers today. And I wanted to thank you again for bringing your expertise to us on this morning's call. We're going to move into the Q&A time, and if you have questions for us, please type them in the chat box where you can see it on your screen. We're happy to spend a couple of minutes answering questions. And then I also want to tell you that we're so happy to hear from you outside of today's webinar. So if you have specific questions, specific requests, things that you're really wondering about, we would love to hear from you, and glad to get back to you with some ideas about some next steps. So I'm going to ask the panelists to come back on, and we are going to, Tatiana, I think this one is for you, about the GSB essays about impact stories.
Mm-hmm. So the way that I love to approach, and exactly as Judith mentioned, I really like to start with these essays because I think they are the ones that probe you the most, push you the most to dig really deep in terms of saying, okay, how can I answer in a credible, compact, compelling way what matters most to me and why? So the way that I like to tackle these essays is by going back into memory lane and then building a timeline of the things from your earliest memory. What are the things that have shaped you? What are the things that impacted you when you were little? What made you more inclined to be studious versus not? Like all these bits and pieces that are going to make your story, what your story is. And so and then further building in terms of grade school, and why did you choose X major versus another? Why did you go to X college, and what were your choices at the time? And then what pushed you into that first job, and what have you learned from it? Like it's building all those bits and pieces in your timeline, and then figuring out what are the most distinctive and the most impactful individuals, events, triggers that have in some way, like with the benefit of hindsight, made you who you are, and that you can find that common thread. What are the things that you value? What are the things that you have prioritized over others, even at a super young age and throughout your life? And then being able to present that into that first essay in a coherent manner, in a way that like it's not only the content that is engaging and that it's making the individual reading that essay want to know more about who you are and feel compelled and on the brink of saying, we need to interview this person, we need to know more about this person. It's both on the way that you assemble that content and the way that you tell it, because it has to be something engaging. Imagine the number of essays that these individuals read, like during the application season. It has to be something that truly ignites something in them. That's engaging.
I love that word. I love that word, ignites. I think that that's really telling. And speaking of igniting, we've got a couple of questions about how to ignite yourself as an alum. What contribution is it? How do you explain what contribution you can make? So the question was directed towards HBS, but we're happy to have a couple of folks answer it. Perhaps Curtis and Malvina can both answer it. Where do you talk about that alumni impact in the essays? How do you talk about it?
Go ahead, Curtis.
Or Malvina, why don't you start us off?
Okay. I think it depends on your situation, I could give you a particular example. If you are applying from a region that doesn't have a large alumni pool, this is something that you could bring up in the essay, that you would be willing to be an active player within the alumni pool, speaking to potential candidates and just helping grow the community within your particular region.
And Curtis, do you have any ideas about, how to mention alumni impact?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really, maybe somewhat to Malvina's point, depends on what you're interested in, frankly. If you're someone who's interested in leading people or even maybe grooming talent, I mean, I know that there are people who serve as admissions consultants. I actually serve as an interview for Wharton's undergrad program. There are just many ways that you can, you can give back. I think also on top of that, just in terms of your contribution and being an ambassador to the school, there are ways that you're doing that beyond sort of the tangible, very direct impact. You are an ambassador, and once you leave Wharton's halls or HBS or GSB or wherever you decide to go, you are a member of that community for life. And so
it could be that you open up like a pipeline of students that might want to work at your company, for example.
Absolutely. And Wharton has a motto of lifelong learning. So I think it's 7 years, you're able to take courses that the school will actually pay for. And so that's another way to both give back to the community, but continue to make your impact be felt throughout the community as an alum.
Tatiana, when do you have students work on an optional essay? What are a couple of the reasons that someone might want to utilize that extra, 200 words or so?
Basically, like the way that we use that essay is when there's further explanation needed in terms of, let's say, the transcripts, they look that they went from kind of a low level at the beginning and then they progressively got better, and that's explained because the candidate moved to the States, and that was like the first semester that they were experiencing not only the cultural change but also the getting ingrained into the system at college, things of that nature, or any other, distress throughout their college years. Anything else that needs further explanation that it doesn't make sense to incorporate either on any of the mini essays, part of the application form, or as part of the essays, because it would be disruptive to the storyline. Anything else that needs further explanation, and that it just makes sense to do it on those optional essays. Generally, I resort to that on those terms.
Curtis, anything else?
I was just going to add that, as someone who came from a journalism and communications background and are going to a school like Wharton, which has a reputation for being very quantitatively rigorous, I think that there's definitely an opportunity in those optional essays. And in fact, that's what I did, was to address that. I had done a master's and had a quantitative statistics course, did pretty well in that, and had other things that could kind of signal my analytical aptitude. But I think for non-traditional folks who might want to emphasize the quantitative experiences that they may have had. I think that that's another good opportunity to do so.
Malvina, anything that you would mention?
I think that's absolutely correct, and I think with HBS they actually leave you very little space, but it's but it's the perfect place to talk about these things.
The things that keep you up at night.
Yes.
I want to acknowledge that we got a question about a recommended age range for MBAs. And I can tell you that we actually have someone new who just joined our team who ran executive education at Booth. So without going into too much detail here on this phone and on this session, Josh, I'm happy to connect you with Bill, who is, again, recently left as the director of executive education at Booth. Delighted to have you meet him, chat with him, get some answers about applying for full-time versus executive programs. And so if you drop me a note after today's session. And one more question I think we have time for about your grade suffering when you were overall involved with the activities. Not a hard thing to explain, but certainly the kind of thing that you probably want to mention. And look, I'm not saying you need to explain 1C or 1D, but if you see that you have an ongoing pattern of the more involved you were, their grades dropped, and this happened repeatedly, then that's when I would probably, just in regards to the question, put something in your optional essay. But a 1C or 1D or a handful isn't really going to be of a major concern unless the admissions directors see a pattern in your background. Happy to talk about more of this offline. So please feel free to let us know. And I know that everyone has given of themselves a great hour on a good Sunday afternoon and evening or Sunday morning in Curtis's place. So I think what we're going to do is just show you our credentials once again, and you can get in touch with us. We would love to have you reach out to us to schedule a free 30-minute strategy session. Delighted to do this with anybody on the call. We're so glad that we had the chance to talk with you all today. And I really am so grateful to my colleagues, Tatiana, Nemo, Curtis, and Malvina, who are based all over the world, and really glad to spend the morning with you. So again, I'm Judith Hodara at Fortuna Admissions. You can jot down our emails. You can write to us on our info site, learn a little bit more about what we do, and good luck. Have a great rest of your day, everybody, and thanks again. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.